guys, Mr. Edwards here, Centreville High School Auto Tech. Today we're going to be learning how to resurface brake rotors. So in order to do this to a brake rotor, we need to have some special equipment, namely a brake lathe. So I'm here at a shop that is thankfully letting me use theirs to show you guys how to properly resurface brake rotors. We do have a brake lathe very similar to this one at school, but since we're not in school right now, having to use what we can, and we're going to learn it on this one right here. One thing to note that is extremely important when we're doing this, make sure you're wearing safety glasses like I am right now. Because as you guys will see in a minute, there's going to be metal shavings that are flying off of this brake rotor. There's some of them right here. We do not want to get those in our eyes. If you get these metal shavings in your eyes, it is not good. It will hurt like crazy. You're going to have to go to the hospital to get them out. And at the hospital, you're not going to like how they get them out. They usually use a special drill and drill bit to actually drill the little metal shaving out of your eyeball. We don't want that to happen to you guys. Please make sure you're wearing safety glasses when you're doing this.
Alright, so here at a shop we have a brake lathe now. This one is similar to the one that we have at school, different brand, so the setup is a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and get our brake lathe set up now. There's a couple things that we need to do before we can actually cut the rotor. We have our rotor down here. We need to clean the rotor off. So any grease, loose rust, anything like that, we need to get off the rotor. I wrote which side of the car the rotor came off of on here so that we know where to put it back. It's a good tip for you because you don't want to mix up rotors between sides of the car. We're going to take a rag here, clean off any loose rust or anything that's up inside the rotor or around the braking surface. See all this loose rust coming off of here. We don't want to have that come flying off when we're cutting our rotor. So there's three things that we're trying to fix on this rotor with the process of resurfacing it. We're trying to fix glazing, which is this gray color to the metal here. That's caused by friction, caused by heat. When you're stepping on the brakes, the car's going 60 miles an hour, friction happens, heat happens, it glazes the metal. We want to get that off of there. We also want to fix any lateral runout in the rotor. So if you step on the brakes on a car when it's going down the road and the whole car shakes real bad or the steering wheel shakes, that's because your rotor is wobbling because there's lateral runout in the surface of it. And what that means is that there's spots of it that are thicker than other spots and the rotor's kind of wavy. We want to fix that, and we want to fix parallelism, which parallelism is the two sides of the rotor not being parallel to each other. All of these things, with the exception of glazing, are not going to be visible to you because the rotor, I mean, it's in hundredths of a millimeter that we're talking in terms of measurement differences, but it's enough to be noticeable. If you guys can see chunks of the rotor that are rusted off or pitted in, anything that looks obvious like that, that doesn't look just like a nice smooth surface, the rotor needs to be replaced. If you have a nice smooth looking rotor like this, we can go ahead and resurface it on our brake lathe. So up here on the lathe, we need to go ahead and get it set up so that we can resurface the rotor. The first thing that we need to do is find a cone that can fit inside of our brake rotor, similar to when we're balancing tires and we need to put it on the tire balance machine. All different cones are up here on the tools that are on the back of the brake lathe cabinet. We just need to find one that fits inside the middle of our rotor, goes a little bit through, but not too far. So as you guys can see here, I've got my rotor, and I'm going to find a cone. I think this one will work. Put it through the back of the rotor and see if it comes through the front a little bit, but not all the way through. And that right there should work perfect. Next thing I need to do is get my brake lathe arbor set up so that I can mount the rotor onto the brake lathe. First thing I need to do is set up an inside hub for the rotor to mount onto. The inside hub is usually going to be a little bit bigger than the outside hub. These are what the hub plates look like. So here's my inside one, and here's my outside one. And you guys can see the difference. This one's slightly smaller. The way these mount on there, you want to mount them with the cup part facing out towards you for the inside one and the cup part facing in for the outside one. And you guys will see that in a second. Put my inner hub plate on, slide it all the way on. The next thing I need to put on is a spring that will let me have a little bit of tension on the rotor. So back here on my tool wall, I find the spring that'll work, slide it on there, and it'll mount onto that hub plate so it gets stuck on there, just like that. Next thing that I'm going to put on is that centering cone that we found that works for that rotor. Right here, push it on there. The next thing I need is my rotor itself. Now watch how I mount the rotor onto the brake lathe. I'm mounting it with the hat part of it, the part that looks like a hat that you would wear on top of your head, facing out towards me. So I get it lined up with its centering cone, nice and even like that, push it on there. Now I'm going to put my outer hub plate on, just like that, and it's a little bit of a juggling act to get everything to hold together, but make sure my rotor's still on the centering cone, my outer hub plate facing in. Now I need to take up the rest of the space on the arbor here. The way I'm going to do that is with a spacer, like this, slide it on there, and then the last thing that I need is my lock nut, which will hold all this together. My lock nut, now, there's threads on one end of the lock nut, and the other end of it is smooth. I'm going to put the threaded end in first because there's not much threads left on here, if you guys can see. If I put the smooth end in first, I won't be able to get threads to catch. So the threaded end first, get it started. One thing that you guys will mess up on if you're not paying attention, the threads on a brake lathe are always going to be left-handed threads, which means it's reverse logic. Lefty tighty, righty loosey. Get on here, turn it to the left, and it will tighten everything up like that. Then there's a special tool that we use to tighten up that lock nut right here. Goes inside the holes on it. Hit it 1, 2, 3. Our brake lathe at school is set up a little bit differently than this. It's actually, the lock nut has, it looks like a regular nut that you put a wrench on, but the way this one's set up, you have to use a special tool for the lock nut. So this is mounted on here now. The next thing that I'm going to do is put on a vibration dampener. What that's going to do is prevent any little tiny vibrations that happen in this rotor from causing any damage to it as we're cutting it. Vibration dampeners look like giant rubber bands, basically. This one right here, that's a thicker rubber band, is meant for thicker rotors, like front rotors that are slotted like this. If you have a thinner rotor, like a rear rotor, you're going to use a smaller rubber band vibration dampener like this one here. So for this rotor, we're going to use our big one here, unlock it, bring it around the rotor, and with a little bit of muscle, it stretches on there, just like that. So now that our brake rotor's mounted on the lathe, we're going to talk about a couple of the different controls here. So over here is our cutter head that's actually going to cut the rotor in a minute. These right here adjust our cutter bits that are going to enable us to have a nice smooth surface and actually cut the rotor. This right here is our control that moves the entire cutter head assembly in and out on the rotor. This is the control that turns on the movement of this because it's automatic drive. Over here, I'll move that out of the way for you, is our on-off switch for the lathe and our speed control. So looking at our rotor now, I'm going to hit the on-off switch and I want to make sure that it spins nice and smooth. Our cutter head is out of the way, it's not touching the rotor at all. I just want to make sure the rotor is spinning nice and smooth, it's not wobbling all over the place when I turn it on. And if you see, it's spinning perfectly straight, not wobbling at all. You can look at both sides of it. It'll cut the rotor nice and smooth. So now, I need to adjust my cutter head here so that the bits, the inside and outside bits, line up evenly with each side of the rotor. The way that I do that is over here, there's a nut. Find the wrench that usually stays with the brake lathe that fits on the nut, loosen it up, and now my entire cutter head will be able to slide in and out. With a little bit of muscle. So with my cutter head loose, I'm going to adjust it to a point where I think it'll be about even. These two nuts up here loosen my cutter head or my cutter bits themselves. So I'm going to loosen them and then use the controls down here to lefty-loosey back them off. And they do sometimes get stuck, so you might have to come up in here, push on them a little bit, tap on them. Same thing over on this side over here. Lefty-loosey, back it off. You shouldn't have to tap on it or anything, but when little bits of metal get up inside of it, well, that should be good right there. I'm going to tighten these back up. And now with the lathe off, I'm just going to use my handle over here, which moves my entire cutter head assembly in and out, to turn it to the right to move the whole cutter head in and make sure that my cutter bits don't contact the rotor at all and that they look like they'll be about even. And they do right there. Back it back off. Come over here and tighten that lock nut back up. Make sure it's good and snug. And now I'm going to turn my brake lathe on. Still the rotor's spinning nice and smooth. That little bit of wobble that you see there is the rubber band. That's the vibration dampener. The rotor itself's not wobbling. And when my cutter head is at about the middle of the rotor, first of all, when the lathe is on like this, make sure you keep your hands away from the moving parts. Notice my hand's out here, not anywhere close to the rotor. But when the cutter head is at the middle of the rotor like that, I'm going to loosen both these nuts back up on the top here and turn my adjustment knob in so that the cutter bit makes light contact with the rotor. Just listen for the very, very slight sound of metal on metal scraping. Just like that. And you can see where it's starting to cut a line on there. Tighten that nut. Over on the inside, the same thing. My lock nut's loose. I'm going to turn my adjustment knob to the right until I just barely make metal contact, and you'll be able to hear it. See where it's starting to cut a line there and you hear metal scraping? Now, with these nuts tight, I'm going to use my adjustment to go all the way in, turning the handle to the right. And I'm keeping my eyes on the outside here where you guys are looking, because I don't want to grind my cutter head up against the hat of the rotor. If I do that, I could damage the brake lathe. So I'm keeping my eyes on it. I go all the way in. It'll start to cut some rust off of it. And stop right there. Now see how my cutter bits are all the way in on the rotor here? Now the next thing I'm going to do is loosen both of my cutting bit lock knobs and then come to my adjusters, and for both of them, inside and outside, if you notice there's lines on here. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 lines. Same thing over here. 1, 2, 3 lines. Come back up here and lock my lock knobs down. Now I'm almost ready to cut my rotor. The next thing that I'm going to do is put another vibration dampener that almost looks like a couple of brake pads onto the rotor, just like that. Then I can come over here, put my brake lathe in gear, and you'll see that the knob starts turning. Now I can adjust the speed of it over here. We're going to start with a relatively fast cut and finish with a slower cut. So when it gets to the end of its first cut, you're going to come back over here, put the brake lathe back in neutral or off, back in the middle so that the drive stops. And if you notice on this side, we still have a little bit of glazing, a little bit of run out on the rotor. This side over here looks much different and much, much better. Nice, clean metal. Our second cut should take care of the other side over here. So for our second cut, we're going to come over here and change the speed all the way down as slow as we can get it for a slow cut. That'll take out any little imperfections in the rotor. I'm going to come back over here, use my adjustment knob to turn the rotor turn the cutter head all the way back into the inside of the rotor. The same knob that was spinning when it was in drive, I'm turning by hand. Come all the way into the inside like that. Now, loosen my cutter bit lock nuts again. Come down to my adjusters and go 1, 2, 3 lines again. Lock. 1, 2, 3 lines again. And lock. Now with it ready to cut, I'm going to put my vibration dampener back on it again, just like so. If you notice when it got out to the end of the first cut, it fell off. That's normal. Come over here, put it back in gear for disc brakes. And you'll notice that it'll spin much slower now. Slow cut, it's going to spin much slower. Take out any of the little imperfections. Again, I cannot stress this enough, guys. These metal shavings that are coming off of here, wear safety glasses. You do not want these in your eyes. Wear safety glasses. So I'm at the end of my slow cut here. You guys can see it took off that last little bit of glazing that was on the outside of the inside of the rotor. The outside of the rotor still looks very nice and clean and smooth. So I'm going to come over here, put my drive back in neutral so it stops spinning, turn my brake rotor off, or turn my brake lathe off. Now with my brake lathe off, I need to get my brake rotor off of the brake lathe. First thing I need to do is get my vibration dampener rubber band off of here. You can just pull on it, pull it out of the way. If the cutter head is in the way at all you got to do is back it up manually, spin it to the left, back it out of the way of the rotor, move that out of the way and hang it up. Now I need to get my brake rotor off the brake lathe. So to do that, I'm going to take my special tool here. Remember, left-handed threads, so hit it to the right, spin it off, take my spacer off here, hang both of those back up on my tool board, take off my outer hub face, hang it up, my brake rotor, my cone, my spring, and my inner hub face. Now your brake rotor looks nice and clean and smooth. The last step that you would want to do is spray it off with some brake clean, wipe it down real good. That way there's no pieces of metal or anything left on it for when you go to put it back on the car.
Okay guys, so we got our brake rotor nice and resurfaced and clean looking now. We took care of all that glazing that was on it, any parallelism between the sides, and any lateral runout or warpage of the rotor. All that looks good now and is all taken care of. The last thing that we would want to do is take a digital caliper or micrometer and measure the thickness of our rotor to make sure it's still above the minimum thickness specifications before we go putting it back on the car. It most likely is, but we're going to check that out in just a minute on this one. The minimum thickness on this was a good 2 millimeters less than the measurement we had before we cut it, but we just want to be sure, that way we're sure that we have safe brakes going down the road.
Okay, so we're here on All Data to check the minimum thickness specifications of our rotors that we just resurfaced. Again, 1996 Toyota Camry V6 sedan, the car that we've been working on. We're going to go to brakes, disc brake system. We're trying to find the minimum thickness for our brake rotor. The rotors that we just resurfaced are front rotors, so we'll go to specifications for our front rotors. Minimum thickness is 1.024 inches. We're going to go up here to our conversion calculator to convert that to millimeters. Go over here to distance, inches, 1.024. Converts to 26.01 millimeters. That's our minimum thickness that these rotors that we just resurfaced can be. So before we resurfaced them, our left front rotor was about 28.13 millimeters and our right front rotor was 28.64 millimeters. Now I've got our left front rotor here all nice and cleaned up and resurfaced. We'll take our digital caliper, go ahead and turn it on. Make sure when it's all the way closed that it's at 0. If it's not, we'll hit our 0 button there to 0 it out. Let's get a measurement right in the middle of it. 27.59 millimeters, so well above, 1.5 millimeters above our minimum thickness. And our right front rotor, take our caliper, again, make sure we start at 0. Get a measurement right in the middle of it, like that. 27.4 millimeters. So again, well over 1 millimeter above our minimum thickness of 26.01 millimeters.
So now that we know that this rotor is still good to go down the road, we can put it back on the car, put new brakes on it, and be good to go. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you learned something cool here with this. I want to give a thank you to the shop that let me use their brake lathe here for teaching you guys this. I hope you guys are doing good. Make sure you fill out your reflection sheet that goes along with this, and I'll talk to you guys soon.